Hello, my name's Mark Arnold from Urban Saints, and this is our second video in a series exploring the world of disability equality. In this video, we're going to be looking at some of the terminology that is prevalent within the world of disability equality and discrimination. What's the difference between additional needs and special educational needs and disability, impairment, inclusion? What do all these things mean? What's accessibility? We're going to be exploring all these terms and helping us to know what each of them means and how they will relate to each other. As we start to do this, we're thinking about this following on from considering the perhaps 14 million people across the UK who have a disability or additional need of some kind. And so this look through the different terminology bears them in mind as we work through it together. First up, let's think about accessibility. What's accessibility? Well, sometimes when we think about accessibility, our default position is this a place or an environment that is able to be accessed by a disabled person? And that's part of the story, and that's part of what we need to be thinking about when considering accessibility. What we really need to be focusing on is that all that we are offering to an individual, whether it's a website, whether it's a booking process, whether it's a phone line to be able to communicate something, whether it's a physical building, the services that we offer, whatever they look like, should be accessible to anybody that wants to engage with them. It shouldn't be up to the disabled person themselves to be able to fit in with what's being provided. What's being provided needs to be broad enough in its accessibility to enable everybody to be able to participate and belong. So accessibility is a duty that we all have to consider the things that we do and provide and make sure that they are ready and accessible in every way for people to be able to engage with. Additional needs. We increasingly use the words additional needs now to describe what previously might have been considered special needs. Additional needs covers a broad range of disabilities and conditions, health conditions. Really, it's anything that anybody is journeying with that requires some differences in the way that they live their day-to-day lives. It might be that that's through a physical disability that they have that requires them to perhaps use a wheelchair. They may be blind or deaf. They may have a mental health condition which requires them to be supported in a different way. Or they may have a hidden disability or difference or diversity, which means that the environment that they are coming into might need to be understanding of the fact that they might find, for example, loud noise difficult to cope with, or flashing lights might be problematic. So additional needs is a broad area that covers a lot of different kinds of difference, diversity, disability and health condition. Special educational needs as a part of that is a term used in schools and colleges for children with a specific diagnosis that requires additional support and input to enable them to get the most out of their time in school or college. Often there'll be a special educational needs coordinator within that school or college environment who, along with the team at the school or college, maybe with parents or the young people themselves, puts together a plan to enable learning to happen as effectively as possible within that environment. Now, when we come on to looking at disability, disability is a term that is enshrined in law, and within the law there is reference to physical and mental impairments. We'll come on to have a little look at the term impairment in just a moment. Disability is legally defined as a physical or mental impairment. It defines it as the effect on normal day-to-day activities being substantial and long-term. A child, young person or adult who has a disability, whether that's a physical, mental or hidden disability, diversity or difference, experiences a substantial loss or limitation of the opportunity to participate in everyday life and to do normal day-to-day activities on an equal level to those of their peers due to barriers resulting from their disability. Now, there's a whole lot for us to unpack there, so let's take that one section at a time. Normal day-to-day activities. Well, normal day-to-day activities as defined here include things like getting up, having a shower, getting changed, going to school or work or going out to the shops, things like that, using a phone, reading, cooking, normal everyday activities that are enshrined under disability legislation there. Now, substantial. That's a really key phrase or word that crops up in this particular definition. And substantial means that it's not something that's minor or trivial. It must be something that is a lifelong condition or that lasts for at least 12 months in order to be classified as a disability. And alongside that, still needs to affect normal day-to-day activities. Now that element of long term is really important for us to unpack a little bit more because take for example somebody who's broken a leg. For about 6 weeks their leg will be in plaster, they may feel like they are partially disabled. But legally they won't be classified as being disabled unless, as a consequence of them breaking their leg, they end up with a longer term mobility difficulty that could classify as a disability. So long term needs to be at least 12 months, often longer than that. There are some automatic disabilities. In other words, if somebody has one of the automatic conditions or disabilities, then legally they don't have to prove their disability beyond the diagnosis of that particular condition. Those include HIV, cancer, multiple sclerosis, amongst the list of conditions that apply there. And anybody who has those conditions, there's no requirement to satisfy any other criteria to demonstrate their disability legally. There are also some deemed disabilities. And those could, for example, include somebody who has been identified as blind or visually impaired or partially sighted by an optician or a doctor, and as a consequence of that, again, they are deemed to have a disability that is lifelong and therefore legally classifies as a disability. When we were looking at disability, we referenced the word impairment, and an impairment can be part of that disability picture. An impairment is a loss or limitation of a function, perhaps a sensory function such as sight or hearing, that can be experienced by a child or young person or adult. And the loss or limitation of that particular sensory function can be classified as an impairment, which is part of the disability definition. Inclusion. So having explored a little bit about disability, additional needs, impairment, how do we build all of that into a picture that includes everybody in the things that we're doing? Well, inclusion is around making sure that any barriers that exist, any obstacles that are in the way of anybody with a disability or additional needs from participating in the stuff that we're doing. It's about getting those barriers and removing them. It's about helping those obstacles to be removed so that everybody can participate in the things that we're doing. A little later we'll talk about reasonable adjustments. The Equality Act refers to reasonable adjustments and helps us through a process of looking at how we evaluate the things that we do identify the obstacles and barriers that might be there, and then go through a process of looking to remove those. And all of that is wrapped up in this sense of inclusion. Inclusion is about everybody being able to participate in what we do, everybody being able to be involved in the things that we are offering. As we head towards starting to unpack the Equality Act a little bit more, we'll come across the term protected characteristics as well. Protected characteristics, there are 9 of them enshrined within the Equality Act, and disability is just one of those. The others are religion or belief, age, sexual orientation, gender, gender reassignment, pregnancy and maternity, marriage and civil partnership, race and ethnicity. And so within those 9 protected characteristics, there are provisions made by the Equality Act to ensure that people are protected from discrimination and have redress legally should they find that they have been discriminated against. We'll be looking at what the Equality Act tells us about all of that in our next video.